Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This column has been written by Mr. Sujan R. Chinoy, a former Indian ambassador and an expert on China, who is also currently the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, which is a government-funded think tank. In this column, the writer explains how China and Pakistan have teamed up together to occupy parts of Kashmir that essentially belongs to India, and how they are functioning in tandem today in order to internationalize the Kashmir dispute, thereby posing a direct challenge to India's territorial sovereignty and integrity. See, from the 1960s till now, China and Pakistan have been colluding together to create challenges for India's territorial claims over Jammu and Kashmir region. Especially after India abrogated Article 370 and reorganized the state of Jammu and Kashmir, both China and Pakistan have been operating together in order to deliberately internationalize the Kashmir dispute, especially at the United Nations, in an attempt to delegitimize India's claims over the region. See, since many decades, Pakistan has followed a multi-pronged strategy to weaken India's claims over Kashmir. One, it has sponsored a violent separatist movement in Jammu and Kashmir, and it has nurtured a variety of anti-India terror groups in order to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. So essentially, it has waged a covert proxy war against India by sponsoring cross-border terrorism, and it is no wonder that Pakistan has been grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force for its repeated failure to act against terror financing. Especially after India abrogated Article 370 and the special status of Jammu and Kashmir and reorganized the state into two union territories, Pakistan has further stepped up its support to cross-border terrorism against India, and this explains why Pakistan was recently retained on the grey list by the FATF. Then too, it has attempted to make constitutional changes in order to increase its hold over occupied areas such as Gilgit-Baltistan and Pakistan-Occupied Kashmir. As we discussed recently, Pakistan is taking forward a proposal to fully integrate Gilgit-Baltistan by declaring it as a province of Pakistan. Over the years, Pakistan has made many such constitutional, legal and demographic changes in the region in order to further increase its hold over the occupied areas and further weaken India's rightful claims. Then 3. It has tied up with China to jointly create numerous challenges for India on multiple fronts. This twin threat began in 1963 when Pakistan illegally ceded a part of Indian territory to China, that is the Shakti Valley region. Then now, China and Pakistan have colluded to develop the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the alignment of this project runs through the Gilgit-Baltistan territory that is claimed by India, and hence this mega project involving massive Chinese investments has openly challenged India's territorial sovereignty in the region, and this is the reason why India chose to boycott the Belt and Road Initiative. Then at the global level, China and Pakistan are working in tandem in order to internationalize the Kashmir dispute, especially at the United Nations, the Organization of Islamic Conference, and at these platforms by raising the issue of Article 370, reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir, and by accusing India of committing human rights violations in J&K. Pakistan, acting at the behest of China, is trying to exert global diplomatic pressure on India. China's motivation for this joint nexus with Pakistan is obviously driven by its Aksai Chin dispute with India. So through this column, the writer explains that it is not just Pakistan which has occupied a part of Indian territory in the Kashmir region, but even China has occupied parts of Kashmir, including the Aksai Chin region and the Shakti Valley. So no wonder Pakistan and China are operating together to create a link between the Kashmir dispute and the Aksai Chin dispute, and it is this twin territorial challenge that the writer is talking about. But however, the writer clearly states that both Pakistan and China have no locus standi whatsoever in this matter, because the instrument of accession that was signed by the Maharaja of Kashmir on the 26th of October 1947 makes it very clear that the entire princely state of Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. So this includes not just Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan that has been illegally occupied by Pakistan, but it also includes the Shakti Valley region that Pakistan had illegally ceded to China through an agreement. Then the writer also explains how over the years China has carried out a creeping annexation in the region, thereby stretching its territorial extent all the way up to the Karakoram Range and the Pamir Knot. And it is for this reason that China considers its hold over the Aksai Chin region and Shaksgam Valley to be critical. For China, there is a strategic significance in linking the Kashmir dispute with the Aksai Chin dispute and in retaining its hold over Shaksgam Valley and Aksai Chin. So to understand this further, let's look at a map of the region. Yes, I am aware that I am using a disputed map of the region. This is because to understand the argument that is being made by the writer, we need to look at the current ground realities as it stands today in order to clearly understand what are India's claims and what are the areas occupied by Pakistan and China. But as UPSC aspirants and as Indian citizens, always remember that our opinions should be in line with the claims made by the Indian government. So the official stand of the Indian government and as well as our official stand is that the whole erstwhile state of J&K is an integral part of the Indian Union. This includes the Aksai Chin region that is under the illegal occupation of China. It also includes Pakistan-Occupied Kashmir or POK and the Gilgit-Baltistan region that has been illegally occupied by Pakistan. And it also includes the Shaksgam Valley that you can see over here, which was illegally ceded by Pakistan to China by signing an agreement in 1963 following the 1962 conflict between India and China. So over the years, China has deployed its engineers and soldiers into the Shaksgam Valley to create infrastructure in order to enhance China's strategic influence in the region and also to further improve its connectivity with Pakistan. These activities of China in the Shaksgam Valley with the support of Pakistan creates an inherent link between the areas of Kashmir that is occupied by Pakistan and China. This area is of great strategic significance because just to the south of Shaksgam Valley, you find this small triangular region which is nothing but the Siachen Glacier that is under India's control. That's the reason why India's hold over the Siachen Glacier is very critical and of strategic significance because it is located at the trijunction of Indian territory and the occupied territories of China and Pakistan. As of today, China occupies a vast area of Indian territory in the J&K region and the writer refers to this as China-Occupied Kashmir. By strengthening its hold over the Shaksgam Valley region that was leased by Pakistan, China has effectively occupied nearly 5,180 square kilometers of Indian territory. Then, by retaining its hold over Aksai Chin, China has illegally occupied close to 38,000 square kilometers of Indian territory. So it is this area that is under the illegal occupation of China that the writer collectively refers to as China-Occupied Kashmir. See, to understand China's territorial expansionism in the region, you need to go back to the late 19th century and understand how the great game that was going on between British India and Russia was exploited by China in order to further extend its territorial control in the region. See, back in the late 19th century, Britain and Russia, they were locked in a great game in the Central Asia region, and reportedly Russia was eyeing Britain's crown jewel, that is the colony of British India in South Asia. So in order to protect its most prized asset, the British government, that is British India, started creating a buffer in the Himalayan region in order to secure the Indian colony from any further advances by Russia from the north. So as a result, British India started building alliances with a number of kingdoms and princely states in the region, including the Maharaja of Kashmir, the Tibetan Kingdom, the Kingdom of Nepal, the Bhutanese Kingdom, etc. So while British India and Russia were locked in this great game, and when they were preoccupied with this, China started exploiting the political vacuum in this region in order to carry out a creeping expansion of its territory. See, historically, it has been well acknowledged that the territorial extent of China was marked by the Kunlun Shan mountain range that stretches all the way up to Xinjiang and Central Asia. So prior to the late 1800s, China had no influence or control to the west of the Kunlun Shan mountain range. There is historical evidence available to show that China didn't exercise any control over the Aksai Chin region, over Shaksgam Valley, and neither over the Gilgit-Baltistan region that meets the Pamir Knot in the Trans-Karakoram area. But as competition between British India and Russia stepped up in the late 19th century, there was a power vacuum in the region which was conveniently exploited by China to push its influence and extend its territorial control and influence in this region. So from the late 19th century, China started stepping up its influence beyond the Kunlun mountain range and started a slow campaign to expand its territory that would go on to stretch all the way up to the Pamir Knot and the Trans-Karakoram area. Through such creeping territorial expansionism, China started exerting influence over the princely state of Hunza in the 1930s. See, Hunza was located somewhere over here in the northernmost part of today's Gilgit-Baltistan, touching Afghanistan, the Karakoram range and the Pamir Knot and the Xinjiang province of China. This princely state of Hunza was seen as the traditional frontier of British India, and after suffering military defeats, the Mir of Hunza had pledged allegiance to British India and the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. But China slowly started cultivating relations with the Mir of Hunza, and slowly it began to see this region as well to be a part of Chinese territory. So clearly, between the 19th and the 20th century, China had clearly pushed its territorial claims far beyond the Kunlun Shan mountain range, stretching all the way up to the Pamir Knot, the Trans-Karakoram area that includes Gilgit-Baltistan, the princely state of Hunza, the Shaksam Valley region, and more importantly the Aksai Chin region as well. This is what explains China's current interest in this region that stretches all the way from Gilgit-Baltistan to Shaksam Valley to Aksai Chin. So based on these historical records, the writer dismisses the claims of both China and Pakistan in the Kashmir region, and he labels the transfer of the Shaksam Valley from Pakistan to China as an illegal transfer. So the writer establishes that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of the Indian Union as it was promised in the Instrument of Accession that was signed by the Maharaja of Kashmir back in 1947. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6, which evaluates the threat of terrorism being faced by Europe. See, recently we discussed in detail the series of terror attacks carried out by jihadist radicals in France. We spoke about the rising threat of jihadist radicalism and the growing threat posed by the ideology of radical outfits such as the Islamic State. France and a few other European countries in particular have been at the receiving end of these violent terror attacks that have been carried out by jihadist radical outfits. Then after these attacks in France, just a few days ago, there was yet another terror attack in Vienna, the capital of Austria. So these series of attacks that has been witnessed in Europe is a reminder that terrorism is a transnational threat that is facing the European continent, and jihadist radical elements will not distinguish between different countries while they are seeking to propagate their radical ideology. While the latest round of attacks originated in France, it has quickly spread to other countries as well, thus highlighting the transnational nature of terrorism. But however, European countries also need to recognize that there are security loopholes in their counter-terrorism architecture, because the terrorist who carried out the attack in Vienna was a convicted Islamic State terrorist, and ideally he should have been placed under a high degree of surveillance by the counter-terror authorities, and hence it has to be explained as to how a convicted terrorist managed to carry out another terror attack, that too at a time when European cities were on a state of high alert. So this brings us to the approach of counter-terrorism when it comes to dealing with radicalization and jihadist radicals. See, radical jihad is based on the ideology of perpetuating violence in order to sow social discord. These elements make use of hurt religious sentiments as an excuse to carry out terrorism and violence, and hence we need to remember that no matter what religious sentiments have been hurt, it can never become a justification or an excuse for carrying out acts of terrorism. And this applies for extremism in not just one religion, but it applies for extremism and fundamentalist activities in all the religions. This is where the editorial points out that counter-terrorism, particularly in Europe, is being increasingly seen as a targeting of Islam as a religion. This feeling has gained ground primarily because of rising Islamophobia in European countries that has been deliberately promoted by certain political parties and politicians as a part of their conservative political ideology. So essentially, these are two sides of the same coin and they are feeding off each other. Every attack carried out by a radical jihadist gives an opportunity for conservative politicians to target the whole religion of Islam in order to further build their political fortunes by deliberately driving up Islamophobia in the European society. As we have pointed out repeatedly, terrorism in any form has no religion of its own, and it is through the misinterpretation of religion that few radical elements propagate such acts of violence. So conservative politics in general, especially in Europe, has been feeding on these sentiments of Islamophobia and hatred towards migrants. And this is only further aggravating the problem and giving more opportunities for promoting radicalization. So this is where the editorial points out that the approach of counterterrorism should be targeted against the radical elements and not against the religion that they claim to represent. Of course, counterterrorism authorities will have to be ruthless and they will have to effectively isolate and target these radical elements by swiftly punishing those who are involved in acts of extremism and terrorism. Any successful counter-terror strategy should also focus on countering the radical ideology that is giving birth to these terrorists, and it should also focus on de-radicalization efforts with the support of the local community in order to push the youth away from the path of radicalism. But in these efforts, counter-terrorism authorities and governments should not forget their commitment to democratic and secular values. Especially Europe, which is seen as the champion of democracy and secularism, should not forget its commitment to pluralism and equality, and it needs to tone down on its Islamophobia, and it needs to stop targeting any particular religion, and conservative political parties and politicians in particular will have to stop pinning the blame on an entire religion for the acts of a few radical elements. So this existential fight between civilization and barbarism, and this fight against hatred and violence cannot be fought by further promoting hatred in the society. So that's the reason why the editorial is calling upon governments and counterterrorism authorities to protect the values of pluralism and secularism while they are engaging in a fight against terrorism and radicalism. Now let's take up a column from page number 7, which illustrates the stellar role that has been performed by the country's central armed police forces in the domain of disaster management, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. See, Central Armed Police Forces or CAPFs are nothing but the country's paramilitary forces that are functioning under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Their primary mandate is to act as border guarding forces and also to help maintain internal security in the country. These Central Armed Police Forces include the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, the Border Security Force, the Sashastra Seema Bal, Assam Rifles, the Central Industrial Security Force, and the Central Reserve Police Force. As per the One Border, One Force policy of the Ministry of Home Affairs, each border guarding force has been given the task to guard one particular international border. So accordingly, the ITBP is responsible for guarding and patrolling India's borders with China. Similarly, the BSF protects India's borders with Pakistan and Bangladesh. The SSB is responsible for India's borders with Nepal and Bhutan, and the Assam Rifles is responsible for India's border with Myanmar. Whereas the CISF specializes in industrial security and it guards several critical infrastructure projects. And the CRPF primarily has an internal security role and it is deployed in a number of conflict zones to conduct anti-Naxal operations and also to deal with insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir. Apart from these border security and internal security roles, these CAPFs they also play a key role during peacetime. They also help in the conduct of elections and they also specialize in the field of disaster management. Several battalions within the CAPFs are specially trained to deal with both natural and man-made disasters, and they are capable of carrying out search and rescue operations. They can provide for relief and rehabilitation measures, and they also specialize in managing CBRN disasters or chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear disasters. Then the country's premier disaster management force, that is the NDRF or the National Disaster Response Force, functions under the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, that is chaired by the Prime Minister. This specialized disaster management force has been set up by drawing 12 battalions from various CAPFs. So few battalions of the Central Armed Police Forces, which are well trained in dealing with disasters, both natural and man-made, they have been deputed to the NDRF in order to make the NDRF a professional force that has been exclusively constituted for dealing with disasters. The NDRF in particular and these specialized battalions of the CAPFs, they are highly specialized units which are very well trained and provided with all the right equipment in order to function as a self-contained unit during times of disasters. The NDRF along with the CAPFs, they are capable of providing all the required disaster management services, including search and rescue, relief and rehabilitation, and also deal with any possible CBRN disasters. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is nothing but a biological disaster, and during this pandemic, the CAPFs and the NDRF, they have performed a stellar role in aiding India's efforts to contain the pandemic. As the pandemic broke out and the number of imported cases started rising, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and the Ministry of Home Affairs, they turned to the ITBP to establish massive quarantine centers. And within a short notice of 2 days, the ITBP managed to set up a 600-bed quarantine facility which helped India deal with the initial imported cases that were coming from abroad. As the pandemic started to spread in India, all the CAPFs, they played a key role in setting up hospital beds in order to ensure that there was no shortage of essential medical services. Based on their expertise, they even helped in drawing up the SOPs or the standard operating procedures, which later became a model for the state governments and the state forces to follow. The CAPFs also pitched in by contributing their team of doctors and paramedics in order to aid India's fight against the pandemic. Then during the lockdown as well, the CRPF was provided with a special grant of 10 crore rupees by the Ministry of Home Affairs in order to launch special relief measures primarily targeted at the migrant workers and others who were affected by the impact of the lockdown. Over the last few months, the NDRF has been involved in training thousands of personnel from the state disaster response forces and the immigration authorities in order to acquaint them with the SOPs for dealing with the pandemic. So this vast experience of the CAPFs and their flexibility has come in handy for the Indian government while dealing with the pandemic, and the resources of the CAPFs has supplemented the efforts of the government. Now let's take up an article from page number 10. The Supreme Court has ruled that all insults are not an offence under the SC/ST Act. See, in order to protect the members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes from any atrocities being committed by the upper castes, the government had enacted the Prevention of Atrocities Act. Under this act, any form of insult, intimidation and attack against members of SC/ST community would be treated as a criminal offence with stringent punishment. Such an act was necessitated because the Indian caste system had oppressed the SC/ST community for centuries together, and there was a need to legally protect the members of these communities from any possible insult, intimidation and attack that could be carried out by members of the upper caste on the account of their caste status. But unfortunately, over the years, these provisions have been widely misused, and any form of insult or assault against a member of the SC/ST community has been treated as a criminal offence. This has led to unfair targeting of a number of government officials and as well as members of the upper caste, and hence the Supreme Court has put an end to this possible misuse through a very important ruling. The Supreme Court has ruled that all insults are not an offence under the SC/ST Act. See, the true purpose of the Act was to punish those who were indulging in deliberate caste-based discrimination against members of the SC/ST community. If a member of the SC/ST community was being insulted or intimidated or being attacked because of his caste, only then such an act should be treated as a criminal offence under the Prevention of Atrocities Act, which provides for very stringent punishment. But if the insult, intimidation or attack is happening for other reasons, maybe personal reasons, then that cannot be treated as an offence under the Prevention of Atrocities Act, and it has to be treated as any other regular offence. So this crucial distinction has been drawn by the Supreme Court, and it has made it clear that in order to press these charges under the Prevention of Atrocities Act, it should be established that the insult, intimidation or attack occurred as a result of the caste of the member belonging to the SC/ST community. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Consider the following statements with regard to the Association of World Election Bodies, or AWEB. Its establishment was proposed by the Republic of Korea, that is South Korea. It provides training programs for election officials of member nations and provides support during a country's election cycle to boost election management capacity. India is looking to become a member of the association soon. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. See, the Association of World Election Bodies was established in 2013 based on the proposal made by South Korea. It brings the election commissions of a number of countries together and promotes joint training programs and boosts the capacity of countries that are going into elections. But India is already a member of this association. In fact, it was one of the founding members, and it was India which suggested this name for the association as well. Currently, India also holds the chair of this association, and India's Chief Election Commissioner Sunil Arora is acting as the chairman of the Association of World Election Bodies. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 9, India's Chief Election Commissioner Sunil Arora has shared India's experience of conducting the Bihar state elections despite the pandemic with members from the Association of World Election Bodies. Now let's take up the next question. The joint military exercise between India and Nepal is known as Surya Kiran. Option C is the right answer. See, Mitra Shakti is India's joint exercise with Sri Lanka, Hand in Hand is with China, and Nomadic Elephant is with Mongolia. These are the joint military exercises involving the Indian Army and the respective armies of these countries. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 10, the Chief of the Indian Army has paid a visit to Nepal and has held crucial discussions. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following are correctly matched? On one side we have India's military exercises, and on the other side we have a list of countries. First we have Shakti and Varuna matched with France, then we have Indra matched with Russia, and finally we have Ajeya warrior and Konkan matched with the United Kingdom. All the three are correctly matched, so option D is the right answer. See, Shakti is the joint military exercise between India and France involving the two armies, whereas Varuna is a naval exercise between India and France. Ajeya warrior is a joint exercise between the two armies of India and UK, whereas Konkan is a naval exercise. Under Indra, both army and naval exercises are held separately with Russia. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 10, India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has highlighted India's increasing defence cooperation with Russia, France, the United Kingdom, United States, and even with Israel. He has highlighted India's increasing focus on defence indigenization and as well as India's increasing focus on the Indo-Pacific region. He has also made a very interesting statement by saying that peace can be established only by increasing one's ability to deter war. This is basically in line with what a number of strategic experts believe, that establishing a credible and strong deterrence is the best form of defense. Now let's take up the next question. The Kartarpur Corridor has been built across which river? The correct answer is option C, the Ravi River. Please look at this map. The Kartarpur Corridor connects Dera Baba Nanak in the Gurdaspur district of India with the Kartarpur Sahib Gurdwara in Pakistan. This pilgrimage corridor has been built over the Ravi River, and it enables Indian pilgrims to travel to Pakistan without a visa and pay their respects at this sacred shrine where Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, is said to have spent his last days. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 10, India has criticized Pakistan for its decision related to Kartarpur Corridor. See, this corridor was established in 2019 and it was a major diplomatic achievement for both the countries because it helped improve people-to-people relations and cultural relations between the two sides. Until now, the corridor on the Pakistani side was being maintained by the Pakistan Sikh Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee. But in a sudden move, Pakistan has transferred this administrative control to a non-Sikh body, and this move has been criticized by India. Now let's take up the next question. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, deals with conflict prevention, crisis management, and post-conflict rehabilitation, or promotion of human rights, freedom of press and fair elections, or arms control and disarmament, or all the above. The correct answer is option D, all the above. See, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is said to be one of the world's largest security-oriented intergovernmental organization. It has around 57 participating countries that are located in Europe, Northern and Central Asia, and as well as in North America. The establishment of this organization can be traced back to the 1975 Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was held in Helsinki, Finland, that led to the signing of the Helsinki Accord, which was seeking to reduce tensions between the Western world and the Soviet Union. The mandate of this organization includes arms control, disarmament, promotion of human rights, freedom of the press, fair elections, and it also includes preventing conflicts, crisis management, and post-conflict rehabilitation. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 13, observers and members of OSCE who are observing the American elections, they have dismissed the baseless claims of Donald Trump regarding voter fraud in the presidential elections. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2017 prelims paper. One of the implications of equality in society is the absence of privileges. Option A is the right answer. Because see, when privileges are not present for any sections of the society, that's when true equality can prevail. Take for example Article 18 of the Indian Constitution. It abolishes titles, thereby restoring equality in the society. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, following the abrogation of Article 370 and reorganization of the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, a China-Pakistan tandem has emerged to internationalize the issue. In this context, analyze the challenges for India. The second question, while stopping terror, authorities should build on values of pluralism and secularism. Discuss in the context of recent terror attacks in Europe. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.